What's all the buzz about on the Paul Report? Well, bees, of course. The National Humane Society says bees are nature's most important and efficient pollinators. Coming up on this episode of the Paul Report, we're joined by Douglas Hart Nature Center volunteer and educator, Dakota Radford, on why we need to befriend this insect. So stay with us.
Okaw Vet Clinic in Tuscola and Dr. Sally Foote remind you to properly take care of your pets and are happy to help support the Paw Report on WEIU. Okaw Vet Clinic located at 140 West Sales Street in downtown Tuscola. More information available at okawvetclinic.com.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
Well, today's Paul Report episode may sting just a little bit. Well, no, not really. Today we're talking all things bees, and we'd like to welcome to the program Dakota Radford. She is an educator and volunteer at the Douglas Hart Nature Center over in Mattoon. And boy, she's got some really neat things that she brought to the studio today, to the set today of the Paul Report. Again, we're talking all things bees, so welcome to the program, and thanks for bringing all these goodies. I can't wait to talk about them.
Well, thank you so much. I am really excited. We've got one of my very favorite things here. Some of my best friends in the table here.
I want to know how your fascination started with bees.
Sure. I actually began as a beekeeper only 4 years ago, so I'm still a novice, but the interest is very addictive. Once you start delving into the world of bees, it just raises so many fascinating questions that you start wanting to get more and more involved with your beehives. I was lucky to have the benefit of local bee clubs and a local bee mentor to help me learn the ropes and get started. And we're just seeing more success every year with the beehives we have out at the Nature Center.
You said you even took some classes. I wouldn't have guessed, but that's something to educate yourself with.
That's right. The Effingham Bee Club offered some excellent bee school classes that you can take over the winter time to prepare for next spring. And I've found that just reading is an incredible resource for information. There's so much information to learn about bees, and there's a lot of great books out there, classics and new books to help you get started.
And there's also the Nature Center. Folks can call you and say, hey, I want to start, and they can ask for Dakota and help them get started.
I have been so fascinated that since we've started these beehives recently, the number of people that have connected to that in terms of having questions about what is happening to bees right now and how can they help and how can they get involved as beekeepers. So I think it's something people are really curious about right now.
And that leads me to my next question, why bees are important to society.
Why would bees be important? They're stinging insects, right? It's easy to not like bees, but once you realize how important they are, boy, these guys are essential to the way we live. They have quantified that all the food you eat, about a third of it is in some way produced by a bee. And it's not just honey-laden food. Sure. We're talking about all the plants in the world that require pollination, and bees are incredibly good pollinators and are actually trucked into many parts of our countries, many parts of the United States where we grow our crops to pollinate our food. So without the honeybee, we would really see a loss in the variety of foods we'd have at hand. Even things like dairy products are affected through the chain reaction. Yeah, those cows eat clover, alfalfa, plants that require pollination. So we sort of see this chain reaction in nature. If the honeybee and other pollinators fall, we're going to see some other issues arise as well that we certainly don't want to have to contend with. So there's a lot of people working right now to keep these honeybees alive and healthy and keep them in our population.
probably the most popular in our population is the honeybee, and we're going to go over all this wonderful, neat stuff that you brought. But there are other varieties of bees out there, a lot.
That's true, yeah. And in fact, to be fair, even though the honeybee gets all the credit, it's not from the United States. We brought it over from Europe a long time ago. Even on the Mayflower, they brought bees. So this is a foreign visitor, the honeybee, but he is so productive as a pollinator. And of course, he makes, or she makes, our delicious honey. But bees will store honey in wax comb, and that's one thing that is unique to honeybees. You're not going to find any other varieties of bees. We have a lot of native insects here in the United States that belong to the bee family, but they perform other services. Most of them are still pollinating, so they're important. Even wasps, you know, I know that we don't want them near the house, but if they're out away from the house, let them be if you can, because they're important pollinators. Those wasps will have a paper hive that they've built out of tree bark and things like that, never wax. So that's a great way to know if you have wasps or honeybees.
You can hold that just for a second. We want to make sure we show our viewers. I have those at my house, and I tend to find them in the eaves of the garage door and like under boards on my deck. I don't know if they just like that texture, but and it almost looks like a teardrop when they build it.
That's right, that's right. And they will actually be raising their young in there, but they are not storing honey in those compartments. So because they're not honeybees. But there are a number of other bees. The mason bee and orchard bee are usually used for pollination. And you can support those little native bees in your yard just with some little holes drilled in a stump or a block of wood. They really like those little solitary holes to nest in.
Well, we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty now. We've learned all the important things that bees can do for us. But let's say somebody out there is interested in becoming a beekeeper.
I hope they are.
A lot goes into being a beekeeper, and as you mentioned to me, it can be an expensive hobby to start.
That's right. The startup cost is a challenge, and so you want to make sure you do your research ahead of time. Winter is the best time to be doing your planning, doing your reading, making your equipment list, and doing some shopping and pricing. To get all of your equipment, including your hive boxes, your smoker, your protective equipment, and your first batch of bees, you're going to be looking at around $1,000 for a startup. Now, the good news is, once you get going, that price is going to drop off dramatically because you'll be able to use that same equipment for many years. And if you're able to start taking a honey harvest and even using the products like the wax to reverse that expense and make a profit. So it certainly can be a very profitable hobby, but you want to make sure you're prepared going into it.
Speaking of preparation, these are some of the items that you said. Let's talk about what you brought along with you today, and I'm just most fascinated with the active bees that you brought in the, and they're working.
That's right.
They're hard working.
That's right. These are all worker bees. They're female bees. They're all sisters, all from the queen of the hive. Now, the queen is not here today. She has to stay in the hive. She is laying 2,000 eggs a day at this time of year, so she's a very busy woman. And these worker bees are doing all the other jobs in the hive. You can see them there tending some of the brood. Those bumpy caps that they're crawling over are actually young bees going through metamorphosis. They'll be bursting out soon to join the workforce. What you're seeing in that box, however, is just a tiny fraction of a single beehive. A single beehive in midsummer is going to have between 50 to 80,000 bees in it.
Oh my.
So this is a very small portion of the population. And a box like this would be part of the actual beehive.
There's multiple boxes then within a hive, correct?
That's right. These boxes stack up. And so as your hive grows, as more bees are born, and even as honey is being produced, you can add additional boxes on to grow your hive and make sure there's space for everything. You're looking at just one frame in there full of bees and bee products. And each frame is removable so that we can take it out to inspect the hive or to collect the honey. So when we get back to the Nature Center today, those bees will return to their hive and continue working for the queen bee.
Can we talk about the queen bee a little bit? How is she identified? What does she look like? And, what is her role in a hive?
She's fascinating, isn't she? Everyone always wants to know about the queen bee. The queen bee is slightly larger than the other bees. If you were able to see her within the hive, and again, you're looking for one bee out of 50 to 80,000 bees, so it can be a big challenge to find the queen even. But if you were to see her, you'd notice her abdomen, the last segment of her body, is about twice as long as the other bees. And of course, that's because she is very heavy with eggs. She will lay eggs her entire life and produce all the bees in the bee colony. She's actually the only bee in the colony that's capable of laying eggs, so she plays a really important role. Without the queen, you won't have new young bees joining the ranks, and the hive will not last. The queen is also the genetic contributor to your bees, so she and her genetics are determining things such as how productive your bees are, how friendly your bees are, and how clean or hygienic they are in terms of ridding the hive of parasites or other pest insects.
Talk about what they're doing. I think the way that you explained how they secrete the wax and how they produce the honey is fascinating.
That's right. So where does the wax come from?
Where does the wax come from?
That's
We hear
the
beeswax.
unanswered question. The wax is actually coming out of the bee's body. It's a secretion that comes off their belly, and they pull that off their belly with their arms. They chew it up to soften it, and they use it to sculpt the beehive. And they're making these cells, these little circular structures or hexagonal structures, very specifically. Each one is exactly the size of a single bee. And that means it's extremely versatile in the hive. It can serve as a little temporary sleeping quarter for an adult bee. It serves as the nursery cradle for the young developing bees, as well as the metamorphosis chamber when they're becoming adults. And they're the storage units for storing honey, for collecting nectar to process into honey, for storing pollen, which is the important protein that bees eat, and just everything in between. So a single cell is going to be used for so many things throughout the course of its life in the hive.
You said what we're looking at now, is you're probably ready to take the honey off of that cartridge or whatever you call
frame,
that.
yes.
That frame. How long does it take for that team of bees to actually produce that much honey? Or how much honey will a bee produce?
That's a great question. A single bee in the course of its life, maybe a 6-week lifespan as an adult bee, will only produce a teaspoon of honey. So we're talking about a very small amount. But when we have tens of thousands of bees working together, it does add up. I'm hoping by the end of the summer to harvest 10 gallons of honey out of this hive, which is a big harvest. But these bees are very productive when they're working in full force here. They will collect the nectar from the flowers. The forager bee passes that along to a worker bee in the hive who stores it in a cell. And using enzymes and fanning, they slowly start evaporating the water out of that nectar to turn it into honey. And it takes a few weeks to get from nectar to honey. It is somewhat weather dependent with humidity and things. But once the honey is ready and the water content is low enough, they will actually sort of let the beekeeper know by building a small wax lid on that cell. And so most of the honey you see on this frame is capped, which means it is ready. We won't be harvesting the side of the frame which they're using to raise their young, but other frames that have no young on them will be ready to be harvested.
Do they always produce honey? I know that may sound like a silly question, but do they?
They do. A bee is a cold-blooded creature, so it has no ability to survive the cold winter, yet somehow this whole hive is going to stay alive all winter long. And they're not even going to go into a true hibernation. They will stay in the beehive, cuddled up together in a big mass, vibrating and shaking and creating heat physically through that movement. And of course, that has a huge caloric cost. They have to be eating all winter, and there are no flowers to visit. So what they're doing, their purpose in making honey, is to create a great big store for wintertime so that that will feed them all through the winter and energize their heat method there. So they're really doing this for their survival. The good news, though, is that they go a little overboard, they over-prep, they make more honey than they're going to need in a winter, and that allows a little bit of room for the beekeeper to come in and make a harvest. We never take all the honey. There's a certain amount, about 60 pounds of honey, that we make sure the bees have for their needs.
Another part of being a beekeeper is a device called a smoker. Which you brought.
That's right.
What is it and why is it used? How is it used?
Yeah, so the smoker is a big metal canister that opens up to take fuel. There's a big billows back here to provide oxygen to the flame inside. So I'd put a little bit of fuel. I actually love using cut up cotton t-shirts. They're really flammable. They burn nicely. Put a little down there, light it, add some more. We'll eventually be able to pack it nearly full with fuel, which will last for an hour or so burning, and close it up here. This thing gets burning hot, so you want to be wearing your gloves. And by puffing it every so often, you're keeping it oxygenated, but you're also throwing the smoke out towards the beehive. And for a long time, they explained this as the bees would smell that smoke and they would get into panic that the hive was burning. They'd go eat a bunch of honey for preparation and be too heavy to fly. I think that theory is turning now towards an understanding that bees have a really complex communication system within the hive, and they're communicating with vibrations, but also with scent. And scent is really important in a hive with no light coming in.
Right.
And so when you send out all that smoke, it really disrupts the communication of an army of bees trying to rally and plan an attack on you. So you've disrupted that line of communication. They're not going to be organized or sure whether to attack or not. And that works great for us, the beekeeper, because we don't want them to attack.
Right. Do you smoke when you go back to the nature center? That's the process you would use to pull that.
Just a little bit of smoke. Yep. You don't want to overdo it. You know, they don't need to be coughing on the smoke, but a little bit of smoke as I pull that frame out to return it to the hive will just keep everyone calm. They're still waiting for the signal. Okay, are we attacking now? No, I'm not catching that signal, so I'll sit tight. And that'll just spare the bees, actually. I'm not as worried about myself with my protective equipment. I'm very safe. But the bees will not survive once they sting. So if they go into attack mode, I'm going to lose some bees from the hive, and I don't want them to do that.
One of the other things I was going to ask you, and you've sort of answered it, but maybe there is more to it. I'm wondering, do you have to feed the bees? But just hearing, they're fed by the pollen, and they're fed by their own honey supply that they make in the hive. Is there other, let's say during the winter, if a beekeeper wants to make sure that his or her bees are going to survive through the winter?
Well, unfortunately, starvation is a real problem for bees right now. Historically, this was not a problem. They could find everything they needed outside with nectar and pollen and then the honey they created. But with time, we have developed quite a few natural areas. There's a lot of loss of habitat. You'll notice even down roads through the countrysides, a lot of ditches are mowed these days. So you're not seeing those wildflowers. And the bees can end up in a situation where they're not finding enough food for the summertime, or more likely, not finding enough food to adequately prepare for winter. So there are steps a beekeeper can take to sort of supply them with extra food, and that's something we only do nowadays that we're having these issues. It wasn't done before. But you can provide things called pollen patties for protein, which is a little pollen cake you set right on top of the hive. And a lot of people will use a sugar water mixture in the spring and in the fall to just sort of supplement the honey that the bees are creating as well. And there are even vitamin mixes that you can give your bees
almost
to
like
try
pets.
to support that health. That's right, they are. And unfortunately, it is something that is becoming necessary to keep our bees healthy as they're running into more and more struggles.
Loss of habitat.
Yeah.
When you take the hive or this frame back to the center, how do you extract the honey? Do you just scrape it, or how does that process work?
There are different options. You can scrape it off. you can stick your finger right in it and eat it that way. Now, since I'm using frames that have a hard plastic foundation here, this gives the frame a lot more support, but it means I can't cut out a big old chunk of honeycomb, which you may have seen honey sold that way before, and that's a really popular way to eat it. But these frames are not designed for that kind of harvest. The frames like you're seeing there in the hive will be processed with a hot knife. So this is an electrical knife that we slide along the top of the wax to remove the caps from the honey. And then the frames are put into a centrifuge that's specially made for honey harvest. And you spin that centrifuge, and the honey is shot out of the cells against the side of the bin and collects down at the bottom to be poured into jars.
In a liquid form, more,
yes,
like that we're used to.
Yep, and that's where you'll see it, and it looks like it's ready to go. And when you see that stream of golden honey coming right out of the centrifuge, it's a really satisfying harvest.
You mentioned at the center that you actually do a bee program, and as we have just a couple of minutes left in our interview today, talk about the programs that you offer for kids and what you do. And you even said kids sometimes get in the bee suits.
That's right. We love, I think it's really important to pass along the message of how important these bees are and that they are good guys out there. These are some of our good beneficial insects. So we do a lot of programming for kids and for adults, but one of the things that I think is most memorable for everyone who comes is to put on a bee suit and go out and look in the actual beehive with me. We do have a number of youth bee suits, so when we have a group of kids out, we can get them usually all into bee suits and go out to the hive. And a lot of the kids really do harbor an apprehension about those bees at first, but my goal is by the end of the experience, they really see the bees as their friends.
Well, you know, I have to ask, have you ever been stung? That's what everybody out there is wanting to know. You put your hands in it, you get the honey, you wear the suit, you wear the smoker. I'm
not one of those hardcore beekeepers that goes out just all natural. I do put on a protective suit. I have what they call a sting-proof suit, so I've never been stung in my protective equipment. However, I have taken the protective equipment off too early, and I've gotten stung once in my career as a beekeeper. So that really has not been a big concern with the protective gear, but I was surprised how much it didn't hurt that bad.
You said
I was expecting more.
Their prime for stinging is when they are what? There's two main.
There's really just two motivators to get a bee to sting you. That's if the bee feels its life is threatened. A lot of kids have stepped on a bee in the grass before and been stung. And the other motivator is if you are endangering the hive. And so as soon as I open that box and touch that frame of honey, I'm going to be seen as an enemy of the hive. And so that's when I want to use the smoke and calm them down.
And wear the suit.
And wear the suit, that's right. They're my friends, but only to a point.
That's right. Dakota, thank you so much for joining us today on the Paul Report. Very interesting. I always walk away from these segments learning more than when we start the interview, and that's what's most important. So
well, thank you for
sharing
having
the
me.
information. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Paul Report. We'll see you next time. If you're a veterinarian, trainer, groomer, specialist, rescue organization, or shelter that would like to partner with the Paw Report by providing expert guests for the show, please contact us by emailing weiu@weiu.net or call 217-581-5956. If you have a topic you'd like to see on the show or questions for our experts, contact us with those too.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
Okaw Vet Clinic in Tuscola and Dr. Sally Foote remind you to properly take care of your pets and are happy to help support the Paw Report on WEIU. Okaw Vet Clinic located at 140 West Sale Street in downtown Tuscola. More information available at okawvetclinic.com.